before we discuss this chapter in Genesis, I want to take a few minutes to discuss something of a general but important nature concerning the Bible. It involves a rather scholarly, a legal term. The word is redacted. Redacted is a word you're going to hear with some regularity in these lessons. It simply means, for the most part, edited. And I know that it bothers some believers to be told that you are not reading the original scriptures in your Bibles. These writings went through a lot of revisions over the ages, but I also want to assure you that these revisions, particularly the Old Testament, were generally minor. We know this is the case because upon the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written down by the Essenes over a period of time from roughly 50 BC to 70 AD, we've been able to compare the words of the Hebrew Old Testament scriptures found among those Dead Sea documents with what we've been using for centuries, and they are close to identical. Only some minor spelling variations were found, and perhaps a phrase here or there was added or dropped or modified, usually by adding, deleting, or changing a person's name or a city. And that was because that name or city more recently went by a different name or a title due to language evolution. None of these variations had any significant effect on the meaning or the principle that was being addressed. Now, understand that the oldest Old Testament documents written in Hebrew currently in use in our modern Bibles were copies from the late 900s AD, just before the time of the Crusaders. The finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls then took us back in one giant leap almost 1,000 years earlier than that time, which is partly why that find was so important for us. So to see that virtually no meaningful changes had occurred over 1,000 years attests to the dedication of the hundreds and thousands of Jews and Gentiles who had hand-copied the Hebrew Bible for further use and distribution over that 10-century period. What we are reading in the Torah and the Old Testament in total is very accurate. At least it is in the original Hebrew. Now, where we do have issues is with translations from Hebrew to other languages. And the first translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew to another language was into Greek. And that was accomplished about 200 years before the Dead Scrolls were written down, called the Septuagint. The Greek language version of the Old Testament has also proven to have been faithfully copied and handed down over the centuries. So it too is a very useful and accurate document. However, as we've discussed before, there are very real challenges in translating the thoughts and the concepts of one culture with its associated language into another culture with its associated language. Hebrew thought and Greek thought were then and remains to this day miles apart. And there are many words and thoughts in Hebrew that have no parallel in Greek. So something close, or at least similar, had to be chosen in some cases. That was the limitation. The problem is even more troublesome with the New Testament, because the oldest New Testament documents we possess were all written in Greek. Yet it's obvious and unchallenged that the writers of the New Testament were Jews. They were Jews thoroughly immersed in Hebrew culture and Hebrew thought. We can compare the ancient Greek Septuagint against the ancient Hebrew Old Testament and fairly easily find where the translation problems lay. But it's somewhat different for the New Testament because we have relatively few passages of New Testament writings that were written down in Hebrew at some point or another. And all of those appear to have been taken from the Greek, not the other way around. Recently, though, a group of Jewish scholars have written a complete Hebrew New Testament, using the tremendous leaps in understanding of Hebrew culture in the days of Yeshua that also gives us a better understanding of first century believers, whether they were Jews or Christians. This Bible was written by the Bible Society of Israel. It is a fully parallel Old Testament and New Testament in English and in Hebrew. It's a very valuable tool for any serious student of the Bible. And by the way, you can get that from Holy Land Marketplace. Now, the translation problem, you see, is further multiplied when you take a Hebrew thought, try to translate it into a foreign language like Greek, then take the Greek and further translate it into yet another language like English. Even more over time, words within a particular language can take on different meanings. What an English word meant when the first King James Bible was written as compared to what it means today can be very different. Here's the thing. Understand that the mere translation of a document from one language to another is by its nature a redaction and editing. Simply translating the Hebrew to Greek and then the Greek to English adds in variations and editorial opinions. Why else do you suppose we have the absolutely endless series of what we call Bible versions in English today? And don't forget that the Bible has also been translated into hundreds of other final languages, and a substantial amount of those are taken from the English.